meglio di qua. Così? Buonasera, buonasera a tutte e tutti. Abbiamo un lungo pomeriggio che ci aspetta, quindi io direi di cominciare ad accomodarvi, possibilmente di avanzare nelle poltrone se potete, in modo da non a quelli della prima fila ovviamente, ma quelli della 20ª fila magari sì. Vedo gente che si allontana invece di occupare la sala. Accomodatevi, mi fa piacere collegare quanto abbiamo condiviso questa mattina parlando dei contenuti delle ambizioni del rapporto con la scelta e l'invito alla professoressa Campton di tenere la lecture pomeridiana. Bene. Questo, come sapete, io cerco di attrarre la vostra attenzione, ma vedo che fatico. Nella tradizione decennale di Urbanitte è una lecture che vuole offrire stimoli alla riflessione nella consapevolezza dell'utilità del confronto e del confronto internazionale, con esperienze di ricerca, ovviamente casi concreti, pratiche diverse, domande di tipo diverso. Abbiamo chiesto alla professoressa Campton di inquadrare il suo contributo con riferimento al titolo che vedete, Leading and Managing the Civic University, e poi ad Angela Barbanente e a Carolina Pacchi di commentare e porre delle domande alla fine della sua lecture, anche se Luis ha appena detto interrompetemi, fate le domande quando volete, però diciamo loro saranno ordinate, per cui chiamerei la professoressa Luis Campton e le professoresse Angela Barbanente e Carolina Pacchi a venire a sedersi qui accanto a me. Please. Ovviamente passiamo a introdurre l'ospite con la quale parleremo in inglese, come sempre in queste nostre lecture pomeridiane, tranne forse una sola, quella che fece il professor Balducci. Abbiamo sempre fatto così, non me lo ricordo, non mi ricordo più. Allora, obviously, thanks a lot to Professor Campton for being here and accepting the invitation of Urbanit for this lecture, and just say some words for introducing our guest. So Louise Campton is Professor of Urban Regional Policy, Strategic Director and Principal Investigator for the Research Insight Northeast at the Center of Urban and Regional Development Studies in the School of Geography, Politics and Sociology. And we have a news because Monday she became the head of department, the first time in 47 years, so like in our university, more or less. Over the 25 years experience as researcher, policymaker, and practitioner in local, regional, and international economic development, she contributes to evolving understanding about the role of a university as anchor institution in local, regional economic growth and innovation in the effect of place in shaping these roles. She is also interested in the process of building local collaborative leadership to develop innovative solutions to meeting local challenges and opportunities. And since August 2020, she has been, as I say, PI of this important initiative led by Newcastle University and delivered via a course partnership with the North Tyne Combined Authority, Newcastle City Council, and Northumbria University. That will be a demonstrator to illustrate how anchoring university institutions can collaborate to maximize the potential of university research to inform place-based policy making and practice, ensuring the future of research agendas and demand-led and shaped by the needs of the Northeast in the case of this research. She is also author and co-author of academic and policy publication exploring the barriers and drivers to university involvement in regional innovation, and they have acted as advisor to local, national, and international organizations to the same topic, helping to shape new policy development. Using the title of one of their book, by putting university in their place, she highlights the potential contribution of higher education to local and regional development by considering whether or not they can be part of the social and economic development in a place-based perspective. So all these kind of approaches are related to our work as Urbanite in the last 10 years, and we think that will be very interesting to learn from her experience. Moreover, she develops the role of engagement with important operational questions and a deep understanding of the specificity of the regional system and its institutional character as a critical issue. Now I will obviously give the floor to Professor Campton, and then we will discuss with Angela and Carolina at the end of the presentation, and maybe with the other members of the Urbanite and other guests here, try to get as much as we can from this comparative insight and suggestion coming from your lecture. So thanks a lot again, and I will give the floor to you. I don't know if you can manage
this. Yes, I think it's fine. Okay, so buongiorno tutti. It's very nice to be here in Bologna. It's my first time in Bologna, so thank you so much to Urbanit and to Professor Daniela De Leo for the invitation, and to my colleagues for joining on this panel. So I hope we'll have a good discussion. I'm very interested to learn from you and to learn a bit about if any of these reflections that I'm going to present have a resonance in the Italian context. Are some things similar? Are some things different? So I hope we have a chance to hear from the different experiences in the room. So just to say a little bit about the structure of the presentation. So I'm going to start with a little bit about context, why this discussion is relevant to us. Then I'll say something about the different models of engagement. Probably it's something people know well. I won't spend a lot of time talking about that. Then looking at some of the opportunities and the benefits for both cities and universities to cooperate and work together. Then I'll talk about what in reality are some of the barriers and the tensions in that, but what some of the drivers are for it as well. I'll present then a case study of a development in Newcastle, which was a collaboration between the city and the university. So to give you a kind of real life example and highlight some of the issues and problems that arose. Then I will just talk about strategically and operationally the questions for universities that university managers and leaders need to ask of themselves if they really do want to maximize the potential for local collaboration beyond just a rhetorical kind of superficial narrative. And then I'll just end with 5, I guess, key takeaways from my research over the past 15 years. Okay, so this is just telling you a little bit. I mean, you gave me a very nice introduction. Please, can you send that to me? It was great. So Daniela already said a lot about my work, but just to say that I've been researching this topic in various countries around Europe, including Italy at one point, but in the Milan region only, and then in the USA, more recently in Colombia and Brazil. And research from various funding sources, including consultancy, but also some research grants, European money back in the day before Brexit, and from UK research funding councils. And I guess this book that we published a few years ago through the Regional Studies Association Policy Impact Book Series is a kind of summary of all of those different areas of research. So putting universities in their place, and we mean that in 2 ways, both making them more place-based, but also knowing their place and knowing where they can and cannot help. But yeah, so that kind of pulls a lot of this learning. Oh, it's very much aimed at policymakers, by the way, not at academics, so it's written in a more accessible kind of way. Okay, so just a little bit on the context. So what we've seen over the last number of years, and I'll say a little bit more in a few minutes about why. Is policymakers increasingly looking for universities, particularly publicly funded universities, to be more proactive in their place, and this is most particularly in less developed and peripheral regions. So while all this has been going on over the past, let's say, about 30 or so years, all of these concepts like the Civic University, the triple helix, now they talk about the quadruple or even the quintuple helix, anchor institutions and all of these concepts have come out as ways of trying to articulate and understand what the roles of these universities are and the kinds of contributions that they might make. And I think my previous Vice-Chancellor, Professor Chris Brink, summed it up quite nicely in this statement when he joined us. He said, you know, we know what universities are good at, okay? We can look at the league tables and we can read all your results. We know what you can do. But what are you good for when it comes to the local social and economic development? So it's quite an interesting challenge. So my research explores and challenges many of the orthodoxies underpinning this policy rhetoric on the role of universities as civic anchors. I contend that a more realistic understanding of universities' role and limitations, along with a more context-sensitive approach to policy design, can lead to more mutually beneficial outcomes for all of us, both the universities and the cities. And these kind of idealized normative models are actually not very helpful because they are actually in reality quite unachievable. So Helen Lawton-Smith puts this very nicely when she says that, you know, talking about the prominence of universities in local and regional innovation and development implies three things. First, that they can make a contribution. So that's not necessarily always the case for many reasons. But even where they can, that they are actually willing and able to mobilize their internal resources to support their cities and regions. And thirdly, that where there are barriers to this taking place, they can actually be overcome with the right policy mix. So those are actually three very big assumptions to make. So hopefully we'll kind of cover some of this in the rest of the presentation. I think as well we also need to understand the kind of culture clash between universities and local authorities, but also businesses and civic sector organizations. I mean, really, universities are crazy places to other people. They just don't understand at all how they work. And this idea that the academic can go and do any research he or she wants without, you know, the president or the rector or the vice chancellor cannot come to you or me and say, you must do this research or you must do that research. And this is just difficult to understand, and the kind of loosely coupled nature of the university, the fact that the rector or the vice chancellor cannot just demand people do certain things just is very alien to other kinds of organizations. And I think we underestimate how little they understand that. So what I see is the head of the city will have a meeting with the vice chancellor of my university and doesn't realize actually, in terms of being able to mobilize resources, money, staff, he actually doesn't have a huge amount of that kind of power. Whereas there's a junior academic that has a £5 million research grant that actually could do a lot for the city. So there's this culture clash, and I think this brings me to mind of the very interesting work that Tony Betcher did in published in the book Academic Tribes and Territories, and saying that really academics are loyal to their discipline, not to their institution. And the institution for most academics is what he called a sheltered workplace. And of course, many academics are not from the city or the region or even the country, and maybe are only staying for 2 years, 5 years. So this is another aspect that creates this culture clash. So yeah, so we need to kind of bear this in mind as well. And then that, you know, in practice, collaboration is often elusive. And this is from some really interesting research that Atta Owusu and his colleagues have done that in Norway that really shows that as a university sort of climbs up the ladder of research, strength, and excellence, it actually becomes more and more detached from its region and place. So on the one hand, all of our leaders want us to be climbing up that ladder, but on the other hand, the consequence of that may be more and more detachment from our place. Which really just brings us to the kind of what I would call the civic or the anchor university paradox. Rich places actually don't really depend very much on their universities for innovation, even for skills, human capital, or any, these things come to those places anyway. So you can think about New York or London or Paris or Milan. If you know London, there's an area around King's Cross and Euston stations called the Knowledge Quarter, which is in a 1-mile radius. In that 1 mile, there are more than 100 research-intensive organizations. 3 of those are universities. So one university in London closes down, it wouldn't even make a ripple in London because all those people instantly get sucked up by all these other organizations. It's no problem. It doesn't matter to London. London doesn't really care that much about the universities. They're happy for them to be there, but they're not like dependent on them. Now you compare that to a small peripheral city in the UK, somewhere like Middlesbrough or Bradford or Hull, where the university is a huge employer proportionally in the city and a huge buyer of goods and services, so that there's a very big direct economic impact. But then, of course, there's the indirect impacts and the building of human capital. Many of these students go to the local university because they don't have the financial means to travel. If one of those universities closes down, and at the moment in the UK, this is a very likely prospect. We have about 12 universities at the moment that are technically bankrupt. So what happens to those places? They are devastated if their university closes. In many of these places, the university had to take over the museum. It had to take over the art gallery because of austerity. It had to take over even some public services like running buses and so on. So the dependence is much, much greater, but for me, it's almost like there's 2 men drowning, pulling each other down. We talked about this in the paper in 2014 with John Goddard and others about the correlation between vulnerable universities and vulnerable institutions. So this paradox basically leads to even greater divisions and disparities as first of all these resources get sucked to the really high-performing places. As we see, you have a north-south divide, we have a north-south divide, but in the other way, yes, exactly. So London and the southeast being a huge magnet for skilled people and, success breeds success breeds success. But even within the cities, the focus on knowledge, high-value job creation and science and innovation and all of this actually can create 2-tier cities where we have jobs for very highly educated elites, and then we have service jobs and precarious contracts and low skills and nothing really in the middle, and we end up with people experiencing the city in 2 different ways. And we saw the consequences of this in London, in the UK last summer with the riots. This was the root of a lot of it. And interestingly, in Middlesbrough, the first building that was attacked was the university. So it's a big challenge. Okay, on that positive note, we'll move on. So this all really raises actually some very serious questions. So, the first, are we letting successful universities off the hook? Because London doesn't need the universities to perform all these civic roles. So they can just get on with being universities and do more teaching and do more research. Meanwhile, we have all these expectations on universities in weaker places, and those universities themselves are struggling. So this is even widening the gap between institutional and place success. And I suppose this is my provocation to the civic university concept is, should we just let universities concentrate on being the best universities they can be and forget about this idea that they have a civic role or an anchor role, because actually maybe it's just making the disparities worse. I don't say yes to that question, by the way, but I think it's worth asking it as the kind of counter narrative. So just very quickly, I'll just go through the models of university engagement. I'm sure people know about this, but so we've seen this evolution over the years from, the first people talking about universities having a central role in the local economy in terms of the provision of knowledge and skills, so on the kind of supply side. And then moving on, we see various authors starting to look at the universities as drivers of innovation and contributing to the delivery of regional policies, which then has led to this increasing expectations for universities to be very proactively supporting their local area beyond just the direct and indirect effects of their presence in the city. So then we see these models, the triple helix, and then moving on to regional innovation systems, entrepreneurial university, the developmental university, engaged university, and the civic. So I'll kind of divide these into two. So first of all, well, just to say there's the traditional university we all know, the ivory tower. It's about under and postgraduate teaching and curiosity-driven research. And its limitations, no direct involvement in regional development, a very spatially blind approach to teaching and research. It teaches what it teaches and it researches what it researches, and it doesn't really matter what's going on outside the walls. And this is your, traditional, typical university, your sort of Oxford type of model. So the other ones I've just grouped into two. So the first I've said is the knowledge-led approach, which is things like the triple helix, regional innovation systems, and so on. So the key concepts here we have are around triple helix, the third mission, knowledge spillovers, and the mechanisms very much about that commercialization, intellectual property, knowledge transfers. Thank you, grazie. Incubators, science parks, very much the kind of business focused. So the limitations here are, first of all, these models very much assume a kind of homogeneity of universities, like we just put them in this circle. Every university is the same as the other university, which of course we all know is entirely not true. Doesn't generally take any kind of place-based approach or have an explicit regional focused. These are very much based on a US model, which we know doesn't really translate nicely into the European context. There's a very different approach to commercialization. They have the Bayh-Dole Act. They have different drivers. So just this idea you can pick up and drop down doesn't ever work. Like Silicon Valley, it's only ever one Silicon Valley, and it's in Silicon Valley. We're never having a UK Silicon Valley or an Italian Silicon Valley because the conditions are different and the context is different. So it really neglects that kind of cultural and social aspects of development. So the fact that it's not just about discovery and patents and licenses, that there's a lot more to it than that, and there's the role of civil society as well and all that. And also doesn't recognize the impact that the internal institutional systems have in terms of driving or hindering engagement. So it gives no credibility to that. Then the next grouping is the partner-led, which is more the engaged, the developmental, the civic, which is the more recent development. So this is about engagement with society as a whole. So it's not just the commercial and the business side of things, engaged teaching and engaged research. So not seeing them as maybe separate, seeing it as a separate third mission, but the engagement is embedded in everything that you do. Here we see the quadruple helix, which brings in civil society into the mix, and this kind of idea of the local anchoring role. So the mechanisms used in these models is about things like co-design and co-production, multidisciplinary and cross-disciplinary working, lifelong learning, seeing the city as a living laboratory, these kind of things. But it also has its own limitations, doesn't really give enough attention to the constraints and the kind of, again, the kind of local context, which can be hindering co-production and collaboration. I mean, I think we all know you get a new president in the university, everything can change in one day. You get a new mayor, you get a new leader in the government, everything can change. We see this in America right now, okay? so it also doesn't take into account sufficiently the impact of national and international policy. So you might be locally very, very willing to collaborate and do things together, but if your national government is not supportive, if there's not the mechanisms and the funds, then it's very difficult to do it. It's also, these are quite normative and idealized models. You know, they kind of describe an unrealistic perfection in some way that really, you know, as I said at the start, it's better to actually be more realistic about the limitations rather than kind of expecting these magic sort of models to deliver. And really it doesn't, for me, there's no empirical evidence underpinning these models. They have a lot of nice happy family case studies, but you know, I don't see the empirical evidence for these. Okay, so let's just kind of go back a bit and see, well, why do we in the first place, why might we want some university and city engagement? So in terms of for the university, contributing to an they can contribute to an assessment of the region's knowledge assets and capabilities and competencies, both in the university and in local businesses that the university engages with. So this is very important in contributing to local and regional strategies. Universities can bring global awareness and partnerships from across regional boundaries, because of course as universities we're national and global institutions, so those linkages can be brought back to our places, back to our cities and regions, to help them develop their strategies and know where to concentrate resources, and of course provide specialist research expertise and linkages to national and international knowledge networks, and very importantly through teaching, but not just under and postgraduate teaching, but also thinking about continuing professional development and lifelong learning. Universities make a huge contribution to their regional human capital. Universities also can help with capacity building through new business formation, spin-outs, graduate placements, encouraging staff to engage with local businesses, can help build the social relations underpinning the regional innovation system, because universities are often seen as neutral actors, particularly in places where there's maybe political tensions or there's tensions between different sectors like the public and the private sector. The universities can provide that kind of safe space for people to come together. And of course, our research is a lot about looking at, you know, our current societal challenges, which are both global and local, so thinking of climate change and so on. So universities can help that local knowledge creation and translation into solutions for both the public and the private sector. So lots and lots that universities can and do offer to their cities and regions. Cities also have things that they can offer their universities, so local recruits, particularly where we see declining student mobility and we need to meet widening participation targets. Cities that have their own buzz environment, I'm sure like a city like Bologna here, like Newcastle as well, you know, with a strong cultural offer, you know, that helps to then act as an attraction for both staff and students. Additional income for services to local businesses through consultancy and CPD. They can provide us with an outward manifestation of our contribution to the civil society. In the UK, I think it's also becoming a thing in Italy as well, that being able to evidence the impact of the research is now becoming quite an important thing for the national funders of research. So we need case studies to be able to evidence this. So by working in partnership with our cities, that helps to generate those case studies for us. And then, you know, if we really embrace the quadruple helix model, we can partner with the city and use the city as a living laboratory for our research. So an example from Newcastle, after the austerity cuts and the transport department had no money left for consultants, so instead they co-located with our transport research group. And it's a brilliant partnership because our researchers can tell them what all the latest thinking, all the new developments, what's happening in different parts of the world. And then the city then gives our researchers the city as a playground where they and the students can go out and change around the traffic systems, or look at different bus route ways, and use the city as their laboratory for their research. So it's a mutually beneficial relationship. And of course, working closely with our places gives us potential access to various local and regional funds. So of course, in the very lucky case for Italy, you still can access these structural funds from the EU, which in the northeast of England we benefited a lot from until 2016. So in summary, I would say there's a case for universities to play more of a role in city and regional innovation and in development and growth, and have a more broader role than just generators of research and just teachers, that there are other upstream activities that they can contribute to. And the diversity of the research base of a university, together with the opportunity that comes from public funding to explore more risky forms of research, can be a real distinctive value that universities can bring to the regional innovation system. And working together with the public sector, businesses and other social partners also gives us exciting opportunities to broaden our role locally, but also to enhance our research and to enhance our teaching. So again, that kind of mutually beneficial role. But policymakers, as well as universities themselves, really need to appreciate just how challenging it is and how long-term it is, and need to really work together to address the challenges. So going back to my very provocative question earlier, should we just let universities be universities? No, we shouldn't. It's of benefit to both the university and the city and the region that we collaborate, but we really have to not underestimate some of the challenges that come from that, which I will say a little bit about now. Okay, so there's drivers of engagement. So since 2008, with the public funding cuts, universities, they've in a way got off quite lightly compared to how other public authorities have been hurt. So, it's right that we have to justify why there is a public investment. And if we have, like in the UK, quite a high student fee, we have to explain what the value is of that fee. There's the funding opportunities. This is increasing all the time. A lot of our research funding now is demanding that we always have collaboration with non-academic partners, so it's a real incentive for us to be working with local partners. Our regions and our countries and the world is facing these existential crises. Climate, aging, conflicts, pandemics, as we recently discovered, and no one discipline has the answer. We have to work right across the disciplines. We need the social sciences as well as the technological disciplines if we're going to find any way to either stop these from happening or at least mitigate when they do happen. And then we have demands from our own citizens. We have a university here, but what's it for me? What's in it for me? If I'm the taxi driver, what's he getting out of or she getting out of the university if he doesn't go there? Their kids don't go there. So we need to be able to say more than we are the university that teaches and does research, so that people can say, yes, I can see it's a good thing to have a university in my place. And our own students and staff, and I have empirical evidence for this, not just from me, but from others as well, that they really do want to make a difference. I mean, nobody goes into academia to become a millionaire, right? People go in because of their passion for a particular subject. But we see the students, in the last 10 years, a real change in the students. It's not just what job will I get and how much will I earn. They really want to help make a contribution to changing the world. And of course, there's the external policy environment, the North-South divide, cohesion policy, about we need to address these place-based disparities and, what is the contribution of universities. So there's a number of drivers here. Some of them are a push, some of them are a pull, but these are only getting stronger all the time. But then the barriers. So this is coming from some of my research, so I've divided them into three. I think there are some fundamental barriers to university and city collaboration. There are some that are internal to the university itself, and then there are some that are external in the external environment. So just to summarize some of these. So fundamental ones. It can often be the case that a university's research and teaching does not reflect the regional economy. Now, in some cases, that's because this university was established hundreds of years ago in a totally different context, or it could be that the local economy has changed dramatically. So when Newcastle University was founded, our big industries were coal mining and shipbuilding. Neither of those industries exist anymore, but a lot of the subjects that were developed in the university were reflecting that. So engineering, for example, is a big subject for us, but we don't really have the local demand for it anymore. So there can be a lack of links between what the university is researching and the needs of the local economy and society. There's also this, as I mentioned earlier, the lack of empirical evidence of really how you do these this engagement beyond a few case studies. So, you know, we don't have the kind of the blueprint for how to make these collaborations work. There's also this local global tension. Universities are global actors. We're recruiting students nationally, internationally, so we need to kind of play these games of league tables, and you know, and that's often not the same things that are helping you develop your local partnerships. And the genuine engagement, I mean, really genuine engagement is very long term, and I mean even up to decades long in developing it to build up those trusted relationships. And a colleague of mine recently described what we do often is drive-by collaboration. You get a 3-year funding grant, you collaborate with whoever it is for 3 years, the funding finishes, you move to the next thing, and meanwhile the partner is left a bit dejected and a bit suspicious and unhappy and doesn't really want to talk to the university again. Okay, we have some internal ones. I will be interested to see whether these are reflecting the Italian situation as well. Certainly, well, this is what I just said about the drive-by collaboration. The engagement is often driven by short-term funding, and as soon as the funding's gone, the engagement finishes. This is changing for us in the UK, but up till quite recently, there was a very spatially blind reward system for research excellence. So the funders would fund the most excellent research. It didn't matter if the need was greater someplace else. It was all about the research excellence. But this is changing, I must say. Again, I have some big survey data for this, that when you ask academics why they do engagement, the top every time, top answer is my personal motivation. And that could be because they're of the type of research they're doing, or because they want to give something back, or, you know, but it's number one is my personal motivation. And then I give about 5 different other answers, like your school or department or, you know, your colleagues. The one that always comes last is the university. So, you know, that's that goes back to what I was saying at the start about the nature of universities and the kind of autonomous nature of academia and the kind of decoupled nature of the institutions. So you can't just go and ask the university to do something. I mean, what is the university? To me, there's no such thing. Institutional history and characteristics can have an impact as well. We found that in the research that we did for the book I showed you at the start about universities in their place. So we found that very old, let's say traditional universities were less likely maybe to be engaged than a new polytechnic, but you know, that's kind of, you would expect that, right? And then of course, we all know this, internal recognition and reward systems. What do people do? They do the things that get them promoted. They do the things that get them funding grants. And these are not often the things that incentivize working locally. Sometimes maybe yes, but you know, often not. And people talk about all the time about, oh, I'm doing this below the radar. I don't want anybody to find out I'm doing this because my dean wants me to be working on more papers or working on more funding applications. And if you're below the radar, then of course the university can't capture or understand or promote what you're doing. And then in the external environment, so the university may be really, really motivated to engage, but if the regional industrial makeup does not match your expertise, or if there's weak demand or weak capacity to absorb knowledge and research, then it's really hard. It's really hard to make that work. So going back to the engineering example in Newcastle, now all of our engineering scholars, they're working with Rolls-Royce and BAE Systems. Those are all in the south of England. They're not in the northeast. The northeast has little SMEs that just can't relate to university research. So we lose that knowledge, it leaks out of the region. Institutional thinness, as I mentioned earlier, so where you have the London situation and the universities can sort of cherry pick what they want to do, because if they don't do it, there's lots of others that can do it. Other places, we have fewer institutions to collaborate with, to get funding with, or to do joint projects with. And then the spatial focus of higher education policy is often national. Now, maybe different here in Italy, where you have more devolved governance than we do in the UK. UK is very centralized. So they will do the policy based on what the nation needs. That doesn't necessarily mean it's what the northeast of England needs or the Midlands needs, but it's what the country as a whole needs. And then just this poor understanding of the diversity and just total kind of heterogeneity of universities by policymakers. They think there's one kind of university, and we're all so incredibly different and distinctive, and they really need to spend time, or we need to help them to understand what that means. What does it mean to work with one polytechnic or another, or to work with a university versus another kind of university? And so we need to work with them on that. And then just to finish this section, just some then of the tensioned issues. So this is why I don't like the normative models, because if you look at how we described back in 2016, when we published the book on the Civic University, we sort of had this normative, this is the bad university that's not Civic, and this is the very beautiful, excellent university that is Civic. And actually, in my chapter in the book, I sort of challenged that and said, actually, it's not about a continuum, and here it's good and there it's bad. It's about these constant tensions that university leaders are having to manage, and in one week they might be on this end, and in another week it might be on that end. So, some of these, there's a lot more, but the main ones for me were about the appetite for risk and be willing to do risky things, but then you have a whole marketing department that wants to preserve the reputation of the universities. So, how do you kind of balance that out? Because if we really want to make a difference, we need to take some risks, but some of them will go wrong, and then what does that mean for our reputation? The local and the global is a huge, huge tension. We are local. Most universities have the name of the place in their name. Bologna. It's, so we are of the place. And in fact, universities have survived longer than almost any other kind of institution. There's no business, well, this one in particular, okay, it's like the oldest, but so you have been here in this university, different governments came and went. I mean, Italy wasn't even a country when this university was founded. So all these things change and move. The university is still there, right? But we are also actors in a global context, and we need to appeal to academics, to students, to funders on a global level. So trying to kind of walk this tightrope can be really challenging. Then do we want civic academies? So the whole university is a civic university, or do we want civic academics? Because they're not really the same thing. So the civic academics are the ones, let 1,000 flowers bloom, they're all doing their own thing, below the radar, maybe above the radar. So we can call ourselves a civic university, we can have a lot of civic academics. What we find often is there's a layer in the middle, the permafrost, which is the deans and the heads of department and the people that need to get the results in terms of funding and in terms of the league tables. So there can be a separation. Are we going to be demand driven or supply led? So do we come with do we say, here's what we've got? Or do we say, what do you want, and we'll do the thing that you want? Do we want to talk about broad challenges or specific problems? And in terms of how we organize it, should it be creative and organic and, you know, we change as things change, or is it more managed? Is it more structured and more bureaucratic? And there are advantages and disadvantages on both those sides. Okay, so I'm going to go on now to talk about the case study from Newcastle. So just to give you the geographic context, so this is England, with the population of 68 million coloured in the red. Then we have the northeast of England, sort of region. We don't really have regions anymore because of Europe, but anyway. It's kind of a region. It's 7 local authorities. The population is about 2 million. The population of the city of Newcastle upon Tyne is 300,000, and then we have the area of Newcastle Central, which has a population of 110,000. I just give you this because I will show you some statistic in a minute that relates to these geographies. Okay. So, in the 1870s, the Newcastle Brewery was established pretty much in the center of the city, on the kind of edge of the city center. And in 1927, they launched the very famous Newcastle Brown Ale, which probably people will be familiar with. And at its peak, so here it is, you can see on the edge of the picture, that's our famous cathedral, St. James's Park. Also in the city center, that's where we go to worship and cry every Saturday. So it's next to the site of this brewery. So at its peak, the brewery was employing 1,200 people, making it a very major employer in the district. So almost 10%, more than 10% actually of that area had their employment in the brewery, and it's quite a big footprint. It's 10 hectares. So then in 2004, Newcastle was designated to be one of 6 so-called science cities in the UK. And the following year, in 2005, the brewery closes and it moves across the river to another city, to a new premises. So the brewery was bought by a partnership between Newcastle University, Newcastle City Council, and the Regional Development Agency. And the plan was to develop Science Central, so to create this kind of knowledge quarter within the city centre of Newcastle. So over the next few years, first of all, the brewery is demolished. Then there was a lot of reclamation and site clearing that had to be done, and decontamination and so on, so this took many years. However, in 2011, the new Conservative-led government abolished the regional development agencies, who was a major funder of this. And of course, we were going through all the austerity measures as well since 2008. So the money basically ran out. So it took until 2014 before the first building went up. But then in 2016, a private investment firm, Legal & General, came in to join the partnership with the university and the city council to reinvigorate the plans, to create what's now called the Helix, which is on the same 10-hectare site, to transform, with the purpose to transform the quality of life with new products and services. So there's 9 key buildings on here. 3 of them belong to the university, 3 of them belong to the city council, and 3 of them belong to the investment firm. But it's all about sort of knowledge and science-based, and the big focus is on digital and healthy aging. But it hasn't been totally popular with the people in the city. This was the local newspaper saying it's a bleak and charmless desert. Locals attack city development. Now we have the councillor, so one of the members of the city council, talking about this is the cutting edge of innovation, it's bringing world-class buildings and facilities and world-leading research and so on. It's all great. But you see from a comment from a local person saying, you know, it used to be nice, but now it's awful. It was better when it was the brewery. I worked there, my family worked there. At least it felt like it was for local people. So this is the two-tier city that I'm talking about. That if you ask most of the residents of Newcastle, would you prefer this or an Amazon warehouse? They would prefer an Amazon warehouse because they'll get jobs there and their kids will get jobs there. But this thing is like a spaceship that dropped from the sky. They feel no connection to it and they don't see any opportunity from that. So this is why I showed you the different geographies, because if we look at 2015, when the year after the first building went up, and we look at the percent of people employed in scientific and other kind of scientific and technical jobs, this does not include university staff. Okay, so this is sort of privately employed. So in the UK, it was 1.2%. In Newcastle, in the northeast, in the centre of Newcastle, it was 0.6%. It was half of the UK average, but we expect that because it's quite a different economy. And then you look to the last statistics we have, and actually, since this site opened up, the gap has increased. And now we can see in the city, it's gone from 0.6% to 0.3%. It's gone in half. So this is just to back up the comment that resident made. This isn't for us. And it's not, because they're not actually getting any jobs, except maybe cleaners and working in the cafe and security. So I'm almost coming to the end. I'll just say a few things about how we put some of this into practice as universities, and then I'll give you my 5 takeaways. So I think as universities, we have some strategic questions we need to answer if we want to genuinely work in partnership and collaboration with our cities and regions. So first of all, like, what do we do? Are we going to focus on specific problems or broad challenges? Let's be clear about this first. What is it we actually are going to do? And do we focus on what we're good at and try to push that out? Or do we focus on what people really need? Now, focusing on what people really need sounds like the best thing to do, but actually that's a very challenging thing, because if what they need is not what we do, are we prepared to change what we do? So, and do we throw the door open and say, come and tell us everything you need, and then think we can respond to that? Or do we say, we can't do everything, let's kind of come to some negotiation around what we can do that's of benefit to you, but what's also within our capacity to do. So who determines our contribution? Do we decide and then talk to the partners, or do we let the partners decide, or ideally we find some way that we can negotiate that together? Then the next question is, who does it? Are we going to define the problems or allow others to? What if our definition of the problem is a little bit different to their definition of the problem? I have been in so many meetings where an academic is presenting their research to a policymaker at the end of the research, 3 years of work, and the policymaker saying, well, that's quite interesting, but actually, if you just had changed the question a little bit more at the start, it would have been much more helpful. There's not really anything we can do with this information that you've just given us. And, you know, what they say to me in my new project all the time is, well, they say 2 things. We don't want to hear more about the problem. We know about the problem. We don't need more research into the problem. What we need is actionable insights. Give us something that we can action. That's what we are asking for, some recommendations. And, you know, I don't know how it is here. I know for social scientists, that can be a very challenging thing. So, and again, this question of, are we a civic university or are we civic academics? So do we give our academics the freedom and the power to go out and engage, or do we try to do it in an institutional way? And then once we decide what we're going to do and who's doing it, how do we do it? Is it individual initiatives, or is it about collective endeavors? Do we create standalone, special purpose vehicles like science parks or incubators or, you know, engagement centers? Or do we try to embed it into everything that we do? And is it bottom down or is it top up? Do we look at what's going on within the academic population and use that to shape what we're offering as a university as a whole, or does the university decide to pick 3 or 4 things and push that down the line? Again, there's problematic issues with both of those approaches. And then where do we do it? I mean, we can be a civic university and do nothing locally. We can do wonderful things in developing countries or in other parts of our country that maybe have more needs. So it doesn't have to be. Nobody says the civic university is only civic if it's working locally. And if you look again, the London example, I know University College London, they do a lot of work in the northeast of England because there's much more need than there is on their doorstep. And then when do we do it? Is it short term and reactive, which can be, that's good because you can be quite dynamic and nimble, or are we more about the long-term strategic, this is what we're going to do for the next 5 or 10 years, but then what happens if the context around us changes? So again, there's kind of ups and downs on both sides. You know, there's the kind of continuity versus change. So continuity is good because it gives you time to get the message across. People know what to ask. They know when to ask it. They know who to come to. They know where the front door is. But then you can become too static. And we have, I don't know, COVID happens, and the whole world turns on its head. And you know, we need to be able to respond in a quick way to that. And then there are some key, then once we've answered those questions or tried to, there's some key operational questions that we need to think about. So, can engagement be embedded in our teaching and research rather than be seen as a standalone activity? You know, this idea of third mission can be, it can make it seem like the lesser thing. It's the third thing after we do the first thing and the second thing. And actually, is it more about embedding it into everything or most of what we do? And then who should get involved? Do we expect every academic to have this as part of their job role? Because I can tell you there's some academics that are just better sitting in the ivory tower, and they're very good at doing the research papers and so on. And then there are others who are very good at going out and engaging, but you know, don't produce the four-star papers every year. But is it more about our collective endeavor than our individual endeavor? And you know, again, I don't have one single answer. There's pros and cons with both approaches. You know, and who decides what needs to happen? Is it the leadership? Is it coming from the voice of the academics? How do we get involved? Do we even have the institutional space to do it? So people are very busy with their teaching, they're very busy with their research. You know, do we even have that space and support structures to be able to do it? Who's responsible for leading it, for coordinating it? How can it be rewarded and incentivized internally? We need to think about our internal systems and processes, and are they pushing against or pushing towards some of this? And my university has changed recently. You can now use your local, not just local, but your general engagement as a part of your promotion application. But you still have to have either research excellence or teaching excellence. That's a requirement. But this can now support your case, which has made a difference. And then we need to think about the role of senior leadership. Does it have to have their endorsement? And this will be different answers in different institutions. In some institutions are very autonomous. You can pretty much just go out and do what you want to do. In others, there's maybe a little bit more of command and control, and it's difficult to do things without the endorsement of senior leaders. And then how do we define the impact, and how do we measure it? How do we show that we're having some positive effect or positive change? And we do need to think about how we evidence and evaluate these things, because that will help to hopefully give us some continuity if we're able to show that it's making a difference. Okay, so my 5 final things in 3 minutes. So my first takeaway is we shouldn't overestimate the potential contribution of universities. There are some people out there that are presenting the universities as the savior of the world, and I think that's actually damaging because we're not the saviors of the world. And it just builds up expectations that we can't meet. And there's a lot of evidence that says a lot of the effects of universities have actually been really exaggerated. And this is when we look at things like commercialization and licensing and the contribution to new business startups and so on. We're actually not really that good at those kind of things. So, you know, there is an over-exaggeration. And, you know, again, the evidence just doesn't exist. You get a few high-profile case studies, the MIT corridor or whatever, you know, and they're actually less than helpful because they just show you what can only have happened once and will never happen again. So, yeah, we need more evidence if people want to back up this claim. There should be a broader understanding of innovation beyond that sort of patents, commercialization. And, you know, and there's a real role for the social sciences in this. There's a real role for the humanities, particularly as we're dealing with these existential crises. You know, it wasn't enough to invent the vaccine. We need to understand how to make people take the vaccine. So, the focus of innovation policy has really been about that scientific research type of thing. And that's led to that very narrow focus on tech transfer, which, as I just said in the last slide, has limited evidence of success. So let's think much more broadly. And in fact, it's probably in social innovation more than technological innovation that we can have an impact. So if we have these unrealistic outcomes, if we're promising the world to our partners, that will just lead to poor outcomes for everybody, and actually especially in peripheral places. So this idea of putting universities in front and center runs the risk of universities, particularly in peripheral places where they're often the only university. They can become overloaded. And this over-dependence on universities as regional actors can actually result in them becoming weaker as they have to spread their resources even more thinly and get distracted from the focus of their core teaching and research missions. So we need to really be careful about this risk of overload. And we do need a much more nuanced approach to policy making and stop following these policy fads. You know, the next Silicon Valley, the next MIT, you know, just stop following these fads because they usually have very poor evidence behind them. Regions are all different, and even within regions, there's more disparities in a region than even between regions, but there's disparities between regions as well. So this is why, you know, the one-size-fits-all approach cannot possibly work. Every context is really different, and you need to invest the time in developing a really deep understanding before you do anything. What are the specificities of this region? What is its institutional character? These things are all, and what does that mean when we want to do engagement? And unfortunately, funders don't want to pay for that. But without doing that, if we go straight into delivery, it's almost always going to fail. And policymakers and our collaborators, they need a better understanding of how universities operate, and we need to help them. So, you know, as well as being incredibly heterogeneous, universities behave very differently to any, as I said at the start, very differently to any other kind of organization. And without understanding how universities work and organize themselves, the policymakers will really struggle to pull the right levers to motivate them to engage in ways that can really have a positive impact. So on that final takeaway, I shall say grazie a tutti, and thank you very much.
Okay, thanks a lot. Thank you very much. And I will ask you to, Angela, to start to do any comments or question that you want to do.
Yes, thank you very much for this speech. I appreciated it really very, very much. I am sincere. Why I appreciate it so much? Because I think that that Daniela was strategic in choosing myself and Carolina Pacchi. Because I come from a southern Italian young little university, and a polytechnic university that was founded in 1999 with the promises that you mentioned in order to support development in our region. It was really difficult to criticize the way in which the linear connection between funding this university, a technical university in southern Italy, and the promises of development that, of course, decision makers, but also academics supported. So your way to put things and to underline how difficulties to have some evidence about. Of course, we have to be careful about using the term evidence-based results, because we know that in this period, ranking of universities are based on evidences. So be careful when speaking about evidence-based knowledge, because it works for the evaluation agencies. It still works for them because they base funding for universities on evidence. So let's be careful. We don't have evidence that there is a relationship between a university in a certain city or region and what it produces. I'm afraid that they could cut or remove also this important. We are not able to say what if without university. We don't know. We are not able to. So what we know is that development processes, social and economic development processes, are really, really problematic, require public policies for long times, require public policies which do not enter in contradiction with other policies. Because we had, on the one hand, policies which supported the development of some regions, but at the same time, we had policies that supported in the universities what? The excellence. If you support the excellence and then you give more money to the excellent university, you really are making some problems for the less lucky universities and regions, because usually they are related. They are related. So this is why I thank you, because you were able to problematize this field much more than how we usually do. And I want to add a point and ask you a question. um, we have to think about the risk for the freedom of our research, even in the civic university, in the engaged university. Is there a risk to be captured, to have a sort of institutional capture? We had business and commercial forms of capture. Also, government, city and regional, urban and regional government institutions can capture. University consents and with the risk of limiting the freedom of teaching and research. So, how to deal with this risk? What about in a period when we have really something in the air? We should be a little bit afraid. And so, this is my first question. Another question concerns the integration that we see in our universities between different forms of relationships with the world, with the cities, regions, business, industries, and so on. So what I think is, and this is the question that I want to ask you, we should not, to my opinion, think to a sort of evolution from a university that is focusing on teaching and research to a different kind of university that is public engaged and so on. This is quite dangerous because the risk is that we neglect just teaching. And in order to meet what the new forms of interaction with the real world, ask us. So I think we should come again to our most important mission, that is to sustain the ability by our students to become citizens able to criticize, to reflect, to have their own ideas and to develop their opportunities in a difficult world. I think that too much speaking about public engagement, etc., and dealing with that risk to subtract a little bit of time, efforts, and passion and love to our first mission. What do you think about it? Okay, thank you.
don't know, maybe we can just if you want to answer or you're going to go forward with Carolina, it's up to you. You wanna
Maybe
Okay.
I'll answer. Angela,
Perfect.
is that okay?
Perfect.
Yeah. So thank you very much. Thank you. I really appreciated your thoughts and your comments. So just some of the points that you made, which I think were very well-made points. So the issue about being evidence-based and be careful and the rankings and so on. So I would recommend, if anybody wants to explore this further, a very good colleague of mine, Ellen Hazelcorn, has written a lot of this about the traps of rankings. And there is an expression in English, I don't know if it's the same in Italian, we say, what gets measured matters, but not everything that matters gets measured. Yes. So once something is measured, the focus of the whole university is on this, and at the risk of everything else. So yes, we have to be conscious of these things, and there is a game to play, is really what it is, and if we can show, so I'm trying to get my university to make a big investment in some more policy-focused work, and I've written a paper. And I'm not trying to say, this is a great project and you should do it, it's a wonderful, I'm saying, this will help with our research rankings in this way. This will help with our teaching in this way. So you have to sort of play the game back to them and articulate things. It's the real world, it's the world in which we live. So we can use these kind of things almost to our advantage if we can find a way to say, if we do this, look, we improve this thing and this measure and this, There was a very good point you made about the policies in contradiction with each other, and this has been a constant theme actually in our research about governments and funding agencies sit in their silos. They're all interested in the university, but in different ways. So if you think at an EU level, you have DG Research paying for the Horizon 2020 and all the big, only interested in research excellence. Only interested in research excellence. Then you have DG Regio with the ERDF and the cohesion funds that are interested in regional disparities. So they're very much interested in specific places more than the excellence. And then you also have DG Education, which has its own kind of objectives as well. And they don't cut across. And what ends up happening is that the very successful, in commas, universities go for the DG research funds because it's much better intervention rate, you get more money, it's more prestigious. And the universities that can't compete go after the DG Regio money, it's less money, it's maybe only 50% intervention, you have a lot of targets and outputs and, So again, we're sort of creating the gap, widening the gap. Okay, so your question about the risk of compromising academic freedom, the thing about institutional capture, so it kind of relates back to what I was saying about the metrics. You not play the game, but you have to be able to turn that to your advantage. So the project I have, Insights Northeast, I try to use the fact that we're drawing on our academic research as a USP, as being able to say, this is not coming from a think tank or a lobby group. This is academic research with no vested interest, so you can take this evidence and you can believe it. It's rigorous. And the fact that if we didn't have academic freedom, then we would not be able to, that would not be any advantage for us. So we need the academic freedom. Just to give you an example, so the last government, the Conservative government, had this project around investment zones. You probably have some in Italy, maybe in the south, special zones, yeah. Special investment zones, special enterprise zones. So the Conservative government is a big believer in all this free markets and so on, neoliberal type approaches. And the local authority was writing a funding bid to get one of these zones. They asked for the research on it. And all of the research says these things are no good. They create more problems. They just displace activity from one place to the next. They tend to drive down wages because they're less regulated. There's no evidence of these being in any way a success. Now, if I was in the think tank or if I was in the policy unit, I'd be saying, well, this is the argument. Yes, we can find this argument and that argument, but we can present them that says, look, I'm sorry, but this is what the research says. And we need to see that as our strength. And we need to have our partners see that as our strength, that we don't have a vested interest, we don't have a particular angle, we just research, see what there is, and then we present that back. So it's that kind of objectivity, I think, so this is why the academic freedom needs to be seen as one of our weapons and not as something that holds us back. And then the final one about our first mission, our very important first mission, and neglecting teaching. I think the engagement, well, I can say from my own experience, the engagement improves the teaching. So we have engaged teaching. So, for example, our politics students, up till a few years ago, when they were doing their third year dissertation, they just selected an idea out of the sky, they wrote their dissertation, they got their mark, they graduated. Now what we do is we've made a partnership with the local authority. We ask them for their list of challenges. We offered this list of challenges. They come in, they talk to the students, they present what they're dealing with. Then the students have the opportunity to say, okay, we'll work on this. So they maybe go and spend a week with the local authority. They write their dissertation. The local authority then writes a letter saying, this is very helpful. Thank you so much. We were able to change this thing or improve this service. In some cases, this has ended up with our students getting then job offers with the local authority, or at least it's given them more employability because they can go to an employer and say, I worked on real world thing, not just this made up case study of whatever. So I think these things can be mutually reinforcing. And I really believe that. And I can see it, it's not easy, but when we get it right, it really, really works. And it's a win-win-win because the student wins, the teacher wins, the partner wins, everybody's happy. Thank you very much.
Okay, thanks a lot.
Thank you so much, Angela. Thank you.
Thanks. I'm very happy that you answered to this question about the improvement of teaching through the engagement, because I was the first time that I disagree with Angela. I was very sad when she said that she was worried about the possibility to lose importance in teaching and research through the engagement. But your answer, I think, was clear about this. So I have a couple of questions, but I'll give the microphone to Carolina. Sorry for that. Sorry. It's your time to say.
Thank you very much. Yeah. Thank you very much, Louise. Really super, super interesting. There's so many aspects I would like to discuss. Because you raised a number of questions we have been thinking about, discussing, both in theory and in practice, I would say. But I will limit myself to 2 or 3 points, which I really found challenging. So the first element is the question of scale. You mentioned it many times throughout your presentation. Which is the scale at which universities should have an impact, whatever we mean? Okay, I'm just using this very generically. Because to a certain extent, you mentioned very clearly a sort of duty to be present and to have an impact locally, in the region, in the city, in the region. And from this point of view, I would ask, who are the stakeholders to whom we have to refer? We have our students, I would say, and their families who invest in universities, directly and indirectly, paying fees and through general taxation. We have, let's say, Italian citizens, because public universities are not locally funded. They are funded through general taxation. And this is something I think we have to bear in mind. So students, first of all, their families, of course, we have this state dimension. And then I have the impression that it's not in contradiction with what you say, but the fact that universities are international, that they are global, independently from the fact that they're excellent or not, this is an incredible value added, also for localities. So I do not want to be nostalgic, but if you think to Bologna, we are in Bologna, and in the Middle Ages, why was Bologna University and therefore the city of Bologna so incredibly successful? Because it was a universitas. So summing up student groups from across Europe, calling the best teachers to give lectures here in Bologna. And there's very nice documents of the local interest in Bologna saying, in the Middle Ages, we have to support this as much as possible. Not just shop owners, the hospitality sector, etc., etc. But jumping to something which is a bit more close to us, I still have the impression that the fact that university is necessarily supralocal, because research is, excellent research, medium research, whatever type of research, is in contact with research throughout at least the region. Certainly in Europe, there's a common research space, but even reaching further. And for the UK, it was a long story, but for us, it's much more recent. The fact that university outreach in terms of student recruitment is global as well, is an incredible value added. So this idea of locality, and I would like to have a bit of reflection on your part, is really slippery, because the question of scale is really a multi-scalar actor, and therefore responding to whom? You aptly said, should we be demand-driven, but demand by whom? Who are the stakeholders? Who can exercise a demand? And of course, here, the other question you ask is, are universities willing and able to respond to demands and to be local development actors? And here, of course, I think it largely depends under which conditions we're talking about that: political, institutional, economic, spatial, et cetera, et cetera. So this is one first point which I think is super interesting. Another aspect we've been discussing, you mentioned it, and also in the discussion with Angela, is the idea of the quality of knowledge that we produce. And this idea of neutrality, which is interesting and challenging at the same time. I don't think that we produce neutral knowledge, but certainly we are not perceived as neutral. In the debate, not just because there's a trend we are all familiar with of disqualifying knowledge, disqualifying institutional knowledge, Novaks, all the debates we are super familiar with, but because obviously individual researchers, research groups, universities, and the university system are not neutral. Neutral with regard to what? Neutral with regard to the, let's say, interpretation, the diagnosis, neutral with regard to the prognosis, so strategies. I have the impression that this is something we may want to challenge. And this, of course, enters openly into controversy. Because yes, we provide excellent knowledge that we have produced through in international comparisons, et cetera, but then this knowledge is controversial, as locally produced knowledge is controversial, because it's political, and politically it will not be acceptable by some of the actors. So the position of knowledge providers, I have the impression that it's highly, highly problematic. And this has to do also with the type of demands that local actors exercise to a certain extent, and I would be super happy to hear something about that. And there's a last point, which has to do with when you asked, but shouldn't engagement be embedded in research and teaching, in core activities? And I would say, I have the impression that this would be much, much stronger in the moment in which it is embedded in our core activities, rather than being, obviously we know the distortions of the evaluation system, so evaluating engagement as a very, very thin layer of our activities. How is it possible? And on this I would very, very much like to have an opinion of yours. How is it possible to strengthen this engagement dimension within our core activities, because the multiplier would be much, much stronger in this case, I have the impression, because this is the activities university do best. One last point, which is just a very quick observation, responding to what Angela said. Daniela chose very well two very different situations. So I come from a technical university, which was a second technical university in Italy, not the first, as we always say, because the first one was in Turin, but let's say the second technical university funded in the period of the Industrial Revolution, which asks some questions today, no? So this type of knowledge. And has been a growing rhetoric, I have the impression, in Milan in particular, in the last few years, about the relevance of universities. And our politicians every time speak about the relevance, the importance of the university ecosystem, the knowledge that is being produced, the knowledge transfer, etc., etc. And if we look at the last few years, I have the impression that the economic model of the city has been, I wouldn't say only, of course, I'm exaggerating a bit, disproportionately being based on real estate development and tourism. So do we need a strong, robust university system to get there? Of course, I'm exaggerating. We all know that there's a much more complex economic base, both in the traditional sectors and in some, let's say, cutting-edge sectors, biotech, health, etc., etc. But is this rhetoric that we are listening to all the time, in Milan is a good example, but I have the impression in many other cases, really grounded? Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot. Do you have your microphone? Yes. Perfect.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Carolina. That's some very challenging questions. I'll do my best. But you raised some very good points here, and of course, there's no simple answer to any of these. It's all different levels and layers, and this is partly why it's so challenging, because there isn't just a kind of a simple linear, yes, this is the right, this is the wrong way to do things. So the demand by whom and the question of scale. I mean, I think this was one of the strategic questions I had, which was, who are we doing this for? And I think, again, that is something we really need to think about as institutions. The answer will be different for each, because partly it'll be to do with your institutional history, it'll be to do with how many universities there are in your city and in your region, how many other sorts of organizations are in your city and region. So I give you back the example of University College London, which is doing a lot of work in the former coalfields in County Durham, because there is the need there, and they have the research, the expertise to help address some of those needs. So I suppose it's about trying to calibrate on both sides, what can we offer and where is there most need. You have a university like Carnegie Mellon in Pittsburgh does a huge amount of work in sub-Saharan Africa, because again, the things that they research, so they do a lot in robotics, and they're doing like creating these low-cost machines to find landmines. So it's about calibrating what our offer and skills and expertise are with where the need is. But of course, if you're a university in a place, in a city, in a region of great need, there's on your doorstep, quite a lot that needs to be done. In terms of scaling it, so yeah, okay, so but I think, again, like with all of these things in the tensions, it's not a binary. It's not a one thing or the other thing. They can both be, if we do it well, they can be mutually reinforcing. So to give you one example, we have a crisis in the UK in terms of adult social care. People are not leaving hospital because they have no place to go. There are no proper care homes. Those workers are leaving the care system like crazy because they get very little pay, and it's a total crisis. So we have somebody in the business school who researches different models of social care around the world, and there's a apparently very interesting approach they have in the Netherlands, where they make these collectives and employee satisfaction is much higher, and the wages are much higher, and the patients are happier. So they're bringing this global knowledge back to the region to say, well, why don't we have a pilot program here? Then meanwhile, I have a program that I'm running on inclusive innovation. So this Helix, this innovation district I showed you, which has been a disaster in many ways, I'm trying to understand how we could have done it better. And so the research now, we have gone to Pittsburgh, we have gone to Medellin in Colombia, we've been to Belfast, and I want to bring that back to Newcastle, but I'm also bringing the Newcastle experience to those places, mostly to say, don't do what we did. But, so these things can kind of, they can be two parts of the same circle, and you take the global to inform the local, but you can also take your local to inform the global. When we get it right, okay, so the Living Lab thing. And I think that then brings me on, was it to your next question? Well, I'll just skip to over one question and come back to it, because this links then to how to strengthen and embed engagement in teaching and research. So already I already gave the example to Angela for the teaching, but I think similarly in the research, so to understand what those local needs are and to co-design and co-create with our partners, whether they be in the health sector or the business sector or the public sector, whichever area they're in, to understand, so not to be, here's the research, at the end of the research 3 years, oh, well, it's not very helpful. We talk to them now right at the very start, and we have developed some new techniques called language exchange workshops, where we bring people from different sectors that are interested in the same thing but use different language, and we try to break down the language barrier. And then we have a follow-on workshop, which is called a Defining the Challenge workshop, and trying to really get to the root of what actually is the key problem here, like in social care. Is it you can't recruit? Is it the skills are too low? Is it, what is it we need to really solve? Then the research has a real purpose, and the answers become really valuable to the policymakers. So I think we should never do things in an altruistic way. I think we should always do things where I get something, you get something, and you get something. Because if it's all on altruism, whenever that money goes, or if I go, or, the whole thing falls apart. But if you have a stake, and I have a stake, and you have a stake, we have a kind of reason to stay and to sit around the table together and overcome the barriers and the challenges. So I think it's finding those win-win-wins where we all have something to benefit, but we can all offer something, then we get to it. It sounds, I don't want to make it sound like it's easy, because I can tell you it really isn't. So the quality of the knowledge, and we don't produce neutral knowledge. Okay, yeah. Are you a philosopher? Is that your background? Yes. But of course you're right. Of course you're right. We all have our bias. We all have our bias. And actually, this was very interesting challenge to the universities. And when they say this thing about, oh, we're so connected to our communities, and community this and community that, and we do this and we do all these nice things, and I say, okay, I have one question. Brexit, right? Who in the university voted for Brexit? I've never met one, but apparently a few did. But it was 95% of the university staff voted against Brexit, and the students. And we are, apart from in London, we are all surrounded by regions that voted, in my case, very heavily for Brexit. And it was described by one commentator as the universities were described as islands of remain in a sea of leave. So that to me demonstrates that we don't know really, we haven't figured out how to share our knowledge effectively. And there's many other, look at Trump, right? Again, how are we so disconnected from our populations and our citizens? How are we not able to make the argument and the case? And I think the economic disparities, the widening economic disparities has a big part to play, and a sense of the elites and the them and us. And, you know, I think we have to hold our hands up a bit. And really, if we're in a publicly funded institution doing publicly funded research, if it doesn't have some direct value to society, why are we doing it?
Thank you very much. I will be very happy to have any question or comments from the audience. I don't know if any of you want to do some comments or question to our guest. Otherwise, I think we can continue to talk, but it will be no positive for the guest. Any question, comments? No, from anyone? All of you are tired, and I don't know if we want to close or if you have any other things to ask you. Are you tired also? But probably I will ask you all my questions during the coffee break, or I don't know if we have a coffee break or not, or a toast. I'm sure that oh, please, come here, please. Thanks a lot. Yes, you have to. We have to use the microphone.
Well, good afternoon, professors. And I would like to ask you about co-production, because I'm a PhD student here in Bologna, and my project is about Civic University developing here in Bologna. So my project right now, even because I'm an anthropologist personally, is focusing on the co-production with citizens. So not so much, but not so much with local authorities, but with citizenship. So we have focus groups and conferences in which we have a deep, we hope, connection with the citizens. And we hope to develop this model and to have some projects that can have a deeper impact. Because as you said for Newcastle, that I have to say I know quite well, because I've been in the Helix and in the Catalyst building, and I know that here in Bologna there's something similar, because we have a university center that's called Polo Navile, that is quite the same, because it's a newly built structures that is built in a really poor neighborhood, so it's not so accepted from by the citizenships. So I wanted to ask you about the co-production process and what do you think about, because here we think that maybe it can be a tiny answer to this enormous problem, but I want to know what you think about. Thank you.
So thank you very much for the speech, and thank you also to the colleagues that commented your inspiring lecture. I have a very short comment that is, I think, useful for us as a research center involving different Italian universities, and a question for you. The comment is that one of the things that I have learned hearing you is that we should not speak about the university. It doesn't exist, the university. It exists a complex system of very different universities in different places, in different parts of our countries, and so on and so forth. And from this point of view, the mechanism through which these universities are engaged with their local, that is very different, as Carolina said, can be completely different. I give a short example. My university, that is the same of Carolina, she's one of the most important representatives of Politecnico di Milano, because she is now pro-rector for the institutional relations for Politecnico di Milano. In this moment, Politecnico di Milano has agreements with 8 of the 10 most important multinationals that are Italian multinationals. 8 of 10. And each of these agreements, obviously, is not a local agreement. it has no relationship really with the local system, because these multinationals work all around the world. And it's interesting that the legal forms of these agreements with these companies are very complicated, are secret, really. Because if she goes and says, okay, can I read the agreement between Politecnico di Milano and, I don't know, one of these companies, she cannot read it, really. I think you have to prove. But, and it's interesting because there is a level of connection between this kind of universities and the economic system that is completely out of scale with the local connections. But on the other side, Politecnico di Milano has a site in Lecco. Lecco is a small city in the northern part of Milan, on the lake. And there is a site of Politecnico di Milano in which there are some mechanical engineering courses that are really defined with a very strong interaction with the local economic system. There is, Sandro knows perfectly, there is a person that was one of the main local firm representatives that decided with the professors which were the courses to give and so on and so forth. So it's only to say that we should understand better the different kind of mechanism through which we have these kind of connections. Also, if we consider only the part of the connection with the economic or the ecosystems and so on and so forth. And I think that the problem of scales that Carolina pointed before is one of the most important. The question is, from this point of view, do you think that the problem of the legal forms and bureaucratic forms and technical forms of the agreements with this kind of actors that interact with universities have a role? I think that is relevant. It's also relevant in the engagement of the universities with the institutions and the public administrations, for example, because we have a lot of potential different connections if we have some kind of agreements, if these agreements are based on monetary exchange, if the universities have some money or not, because sometimes we do a lot of things without having any money. So if the technical, legal, and practical form of interactions is relevant or not for this kind of connections and relationships.
Yeah, thank you both very much. I mean, there's some similarities actually between the two questions, but just at different levels. So just coming to the first question about the thing co-production with citizens, and yeah, so I think we do have to be careful because I see us falling into the trap sometimes at my university about some of these buzzwords. Co-production and co-design, and is it really is my first kind of question, or is it researchers telling people what they need to do? And we have done, I can tell you afterwards, and if we're having coffee or something, I can show you a report that we recently did where we talked to a lot of community groups in a deprived part of the region and kind of wanted to understand more what their interactions were with the universities and really to ask them what is it they really want from universities. And it was a very interesting exercise. And the thing that we heard very loudly was that they find many times their relationships with universities, they find them very extractive. So some researcher comes into their community, asks a lot of questions, takes a lot of knowledge, goes and writes their paper, and that's the end of it. Or then next year somebody comes and asks them the same questions all over again, but meanwhile nothing changes. So I think if we really want to be genuinely co-productive, we have to give something away. We have to give them some power. We have to give them some agency. We have to be willing to not be in control of the whole process, because if we are, it's not co-production. So there's a whole load of things we could say about this, but I'll send you the link to the report that I just talked about. I mean, the other thing that I find really interesting is we talk about the quadruple helix, And we talk about citizens and engagement and society, but you look at the funding applications and there's always money for the university, there's often money for the public sector, and there's often money for the business. You hardly ever see money going to the citizens or, you know. So if we're talking about them as partners, we have to honor them as partners. So I think we need almost like a code of conduct to work with these, because it's really sad. You hear so many times, I never want to talk to the university again. They came in and they took all of this knowledge, they talked to all of my clients about their mental health, and then they left, and nothing changed for us, except for this professor got a prize or a promotion or whatever. So I think we really need to think about code of conduct in doing these things. Going on to your question then about things like these multinational agreements and to what purpose. So I think when we're setting out our civic endeavors or missions or whatever we want to call it, it's fine to have different sets of objectives for different things and to have a kind of a portfolio approach. So you might want to work with a community or some SMEs in the city that are struggling. That's going to be a very different relationship to the multinational. But I guess you always have to fundamentally be coming back to what's the purpose and what are the impacts going to be. So maybe working with the multinationals is bringing new knowledge into your region, or it's enhancing the expertise of your researchers who can then go and work maybe with local companies, or it's going to attract these companies to come and set up some businesses around Milan, which will create employment opportunities. I mean, I'm quite sure you don't sign the agreement without thinking of what the outcomes and the benefits are going to be. So sometimes these things can be more upstream. So it could be you're working with a company that's going to develop a cure for dementia. Great, you know, even if not one job is created in Milan, that's fine, because hundreds of people and thousands of people will have their dementia cured. So, you know, things can be sort of immediate and tangible, or they can be more about the upstream. But I suppose we just all, in every relationship, whether it's one-to-one or institution to institution, is just understanding, I mean, why are we doing this? You know, why? So what's the elevator pitch if somebody kind of puts a gun to your head and say, explain to me why you're doing this and what the purposes are? It's just really just knowing why. And that sounds really simple, but I think we often just kind of do things because this is the way we've always done it, or I don't know, we get swept away by the tide and we just end up suddenly somewhere else without really understanding how we got there. So I suppose it's really just being a little bit more deliberative. And I think there is an opportunity, if I remember, we had this in that book I showed you, that, like, to have a kind of a framework that just helps you to think through, well, we're doing this, and this is why, and this is who, and this is what we expect the outcome to be, and just kind of, you know, having that sort of intellectual exercise, really. And then if you get all your different initiatives and put them all together, does this look like a coherent program? But it's fine, I think, to be operating on all these different levels. As I said earlier, it doesn't have to be one thing or the other. It's about a combination. But it makes it very complex. It really does make it very complex. And sometimes we miss the connections as well between the different activities. But having some way to be explicit in articulating them is a starting point to help kind of make it a little bit more coherent.
Thank you very much. I hope there is other question somewhere in the room. No? Very tired? Someone look at the time and say, stop, please stop. Okay, thanks a lot. Thank you very much again to Louise, and thanks to Angela and Carolina for the question, and thanks a lot. Thanks. Riprendiamo alle 5:30 perché pare che la seduta sia stata anticipata alle 5:30. Perché le 6:30 era troppo tardi. Ok, grazie a tutti, alle 5:30.